Hello, welcome to another edition of Beyond the Box Score. I'm Treyvon Hastings with me, Joey Korsanowski, and this week's episode is quite linear. We're going to discuss a particular thing at the beginning of this, as well as the end of this, one on college football, one on the NFL, and we're also going to sandwich these two topics with two other topics that are also linear for college football and the NFL. So we're actually going to get started with the firing of James Franklin. I was curious if this would happen. I didn't think it would happen in season, but a $49 million buyout. I've seen 56 reported as well, but anywhere between that range. And a fascinating thing about James Franklin's contract is that in the wording of it, he is required to get another job. So uh, that job could be, any amount of money. It could be whatever. But the point is, if the job makes less than $8 million a year, which is what he would have made at Penn State is only responsible to split the difference or whatever's left and pay it. So let's say he goes into TV, makes $4 million. Penn State's only responsible to pay him the other $4 million. So James Franklin's kind of capped at $8 million altogether. If he finds something else in coaching or TV, for example, that would pay him more than $8 million, Penn State gets off the hook here. So if I was James Franklin, I'm gonna go work at McDonald's for like $1, and I'm gonna make the university pay their whole buyout that they're supposed to pay. I mean, that's just what I would do and be petty about it. But I want to get your thoughts because James Franklin, uh, while in my opinion a pretty good coach, he's not in that elite level. He should get a lot more credit than he probably does for leading Vanderbilt to three straight bowl wins after only having four appearances in school history prior to his arrival there. And then obviously taking post scandal Penn State into a consistent 10-win program. I think that's something that doesn't happen very often. It is unheard of, and he should be applauded for it in terms of establishing Penn State on the national level as a national powerhouse.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the more interesting fires we've had because obviously Penn State doesn't make this move unless they feel like they have better or they feel like they can do better, and clearly they do because I think it was Josh Pate said this, and I thought it was really interesting on the ladder rungs for college coaches. And there's you got the top, the middle, the bottom. James Franklin is certainly closer to the top than he is towards the middle or towards the bottom. I mean, he is certainly up there. I know we don't equate certain postseason success or national championships with James Franklin. But let's be real, he's put a lot of guys in the NFL, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and he's won a lot of games. He just has not been able to beat those big teams, and quite frankly, that's why Ryan Day was on the hot seat last year, right? Because he couldn't beat his rival, he couldn't get over the hump, but obviously he did that. So I think this is really interesting. As for James Franklin, I really have no idea where he's going to end up. He certainly will get hired. I think he will get another chance, and I think he should, to be honest. I think sometimes in a case like this, sometimes just a fresh start is needed. I mean, especially nobody expected them to lose 3 games in a row. I mean, once they lost that Oregon game, and then once they lost to UCLA, it kind of felt like it was done. It was done. But then losing to Northwestern at home, I know Aller got hurt, but like, yeah, that's about as rock bottom as it gets for a team like Penn State. But yeah, I was more shocked than anything, to be honest. I'm not normally a fan of firing coaches mid-season, but I think for this, a change was just kind of needed.
I agree wholeheartedly. I do think he'll get another coaching position. Where that is, I don't know because obviously some dominoes are that there are dominoes that need to fall in order for him to get a position. At what type of school that might be, I don't know. But
Could go to Florida if they
he,
let go Napier.
I do think beating Texas and being in that LSU game, despite it being ugly, they have another chance against A&M this week. I think Billy Napier might be safe.
Yeah,
The school and university also had already said that they're committing to Billy Napier throughout at least the rest of the season. So if he is fired, it would be after the season. And then from there, I mean, listen, James Franklin, in terms of tiers, is above Billy Napier, and I do think he could try to kind of revive Florida. I think if Florida State had another down year, Mike Norvell would have been on the hot seat. I think for a second there, it looked like Kalen DeBoer would be on the hot seat, as well as a few other coaches. But despite that, Um, there are tons of names swirling about who's going to replace James Franklin at Penn State, and I'm honestly curious who might take that job. I have seen reports that they're going to go all in and try to get Marcus Freeman. I don't really think it makes sense because Marcus Freeman is a less experienced, shorter tenured version of James Franklin, whose biggest win was actually against James Franklin in the playoffs. So I don't think you're really doing anything, and you're kind of doing a disservice if you go after Marcus Freeman, who hasn't proven he can win those big games either. They're going to have to go after a big name coach. Obviously, I've seen the Kurt Signetti thing thrown out there. I don't think he's going to leave Indiana.
No.
He's going to get Penn State's decommitments most likely. So along
he
with
plus he's done more in 2 years than James Franklin did in 10 years at Penn State. So there's no reason for, especially after that win against Oregon. There's no reason for him to leave.
yeah, 100%. I've seen the Matt Campbells of the world thrown out there, Matt Rule thrown out there. But if Matt Rule wins 10 games at Nebraska this year, or even 9, and is a fringe playoff contender, which we'll get to them in a second, I think he's going to just stay at Nebraska. Now, if he were to get fired, that might be a different conversation, but Nebraska would have to collapse at the end of the season for that to happen. I think there are some other names that have been lingering outside of those few that I mentioned, but a name I have not seen who could make sense if he wants to go into a more elite tier of program that he's running would be Deion Sanders. I don't think Deion is going to leave Colorado. But if he were to want to elevate to the next tier and maybe a bigger conference as well, a bigger brand, then Penn State would make sense. But I think ultimately Deion's going to hold out at Colorado until that FSU job opens up. So the whole James Franklin thing, it was due to come to an end at some point. I felt like we were in the last few years of it, but it ended up being this year. The two crucial losses to Northwestern and UCLA were just very downright surprising, to be honest with you, especially the Northwestern one.
Well, yeah, in coming into this year, you had known that this was kind of a make or break year for James Franklin. Obviously, he had fallen short the last couple of years, and that that really tough loss to Notre Dame in the playoff last year. I mean, let's be real, Penn State had every chance to win that game. I think they were leading at halftime, and they led for most of the game. So when they lost to Oregon, it had that Oregon game, you could just tell Penn State had that circled for months. You knew that they said, this is our whiteout game. This is our chance to prove it. This is our game. To really to right the ship that James Franklin doesn't win big games. And when they had lost that game, this is exactly what we talked about. We had said James Franklin's on the hot seat. This loss is going to break him because, and especially not even just losing, but losing the way they did in double overtime. Aller throws an interception. They take the first lead in overtime. All you got to do is get a stop. So losing the game the way they did, just completely brutal. And yeah, that loss I think solely caused the firing of James Franklin. And it's crazy, because we talked about they were a few plays away from a national championship, and then 7-8 months later, he's out of a job. So it's just crazy how things can turn so fast.
100% agree. It'll be fascinating to watch not only that coaching search, but also how Penn State's season ends. They are now 3-3. They will not finish the season ranked, nor will they probably re-enter the rankings
No.
because Drew Aller, who we have also talked about in the past in terms of his NFL stock, he gets injured. He's out for the season, and I'm curious to see what that's going to do to his draft stock. Obviously, this might be a situation where he's out of eligibility. Maybe he could potentially get a redshirt year from a waiver year from the NCAA. But if that were not to happen, you brought up a good point about Drew Aller, where the longer he's away and he's doing his own thing, and you're not actually watching him play, it actually could elevate his stock because you've mentioned he's kind of like the prototypical 5 tool quarterback in the NFL. He's got all the skills and traits and the physique as well, but he hasn't been able to put it all on display. So this might actually be somewhat of a blessing in disguise for Drew Aller, despite these season-ending injury, because he could actually elevate his draft stock and raise it if he's able to rehab and get back for the combine and get away from this whole Penn State debacle that has now happened over the last month.
Yeah, and I think Aller was kind of in the same boat as James Franklin. To really put Aller as that clear cut, top quarterback in the nation, he kind of needed that signature win, and I mean that was the reason. I think that's part of the reason why he came back. Was to go and win a national championship. I think he did come back. We talked about this in the past. I think he did come back because he realized he wasn't going to get drafted as high as he had originally thought. But yeah, this injury, I think for him, I mean, so they say they lose to Northwestern and he's healthy. I mean, I don't really know how his season looks the rest of the year without James Franklin. I honestly don't. And honestly, I think Aller's injury probably played a part in Franklin's fire. I think Penn State looked at this as a complete opportunity to just wipe everything clean and start fresh. So, yeah, Drew Aller will be very interesting to see. Even just how healthy he can be come the combine and come the pro day. But yeah, when you look at him, he, like you said, he has all the tools to be a capable NFL quarterback. He's going to show out on his pro day. I mean, you're going to see the arm strength. He's probably going to look more mobile than he is in game. So I don't see any reason why a team wouldn't take him in the fourth, fifth round, kind of as a flyer. Uh, really, I mean, really any team in need of a quarterback or even a backup quarterback, because I think a lot of teams and a lot of scouts are going to see those traits in the pro day and in the combine and be like, we can develop those traits, and especially if you can give them time to sit. If you already have an established veteran starter, yeah, I don't see why a team wouldn't take a chance on him.
I agree, and I do think this could become very. I've said Drew Aller's kind of in a weird tier of like Josh Allen slash Josh Rosen in terms of having all the tools. They look very legit. Josh Allen was a lot more up and down in college, but Josh Rosen was easily from a talent perspective and in terms of production outside of what Baker was doing at Oklahoma and even what Sam Darnold was doing at times USC, Rosen was definitely in that next tier of productivity. Obviously, we forget about highlighting Lamar Jackson and all of that, but it was a different type of circumstance for him. So um, I think the Drew Aller thing. I still think there's going to be a team that it's every year. There's a team that's going to reach. They're going to take him first or second round, and I do think there's a chance he'd be in the first round. Obviously, there's got to be a lot of QB dominoes to fall in the NFL as well, and if there's not, then he won't go in the first round. But I think teams like the Raiders, who all of a sudden are regretting paying Geno Smith all of that money, teams like them, for example, who didn't think they'd be in the quarterback market, might actually need to be, and he might be a potential flyer that they look into. So we'll keep an eye on the Drew Aller thing as well. But we're going to transition into this next college football topic, which we actually were presented a topic. We're going to discuss that topic. We're also going to add on to it. The question was, does Nebraska make the playoff if they win out? And in terms of winning out, that includes beating USC. Obviously, we'll both give our thoughts on this, but I think that if Nebraska wins out and they beat USC and they're the third team in the Big Ten, I think they're a fringe playoff team. I can't say definitively if they would get in because, frankly, their strength of schedule doesn't look nearly as good with Penn State falling off, with Iowa still being kind of wishy washy. But Nebraska hasn't been able to beat Iowa in a while. So I think if they were able to run the table, I think they're a fringe playoff team as long as they pass that eye test and statistically they're where they need to be. But I think it's fringe. I think they would definitely be in the 10 to 12 range, but it would help a lot more if they actually got to the Big Ten championship game and say they lose to Ohio State in a one score game or 10-point game. I do think that would actually help their resume rather than not being in it at all.
I definitely agree. I think that they would need to at least be there to certainly be in. I mean, I'm just looking at these teams in the top 25 now. Like Missouri is ahead of Nebraska, which, to be honest, I could probably talk all day. I mean, you could go back and forth about the SEC bias in these rankings. Uh, Missouri, Vanderbilt are above them. I mean, there's a lot of one-loss teams that are ahead of them that if they win out, like I don't think Missouri would make the SEC championship, nor would Vandy. So I don't know. I think it would just be tough for Nebraska, considering where they're ranked right now. If they were ranked a little bit higher, I think they would have a chance. And like you said, their strength of schedule is definitely going to be a factor because the rest of their schedule. I mean, what's their next biggest game? UCLA, and to be honest, I mean that could be a lot tougher of a game than we had thought probably just a couple of weeks ago. But Yeah, they're certainly going to need some help from some of these teams ahead of them. But like we're only about halfway through the regular season. I mean, there's still a ton of football left to be played. But I think they would definitely be in the discussion. But to be honest, I think they would just be on the outside looking in. I think that they would kind of be like, might be a bad comparison, kind of like Alabama last year, just a team where they felt like they should be in, based on, they play tougher competition because they play in the Big Ten, but I think they'll get just left out.
I think a good comparison for Nebraska would be South Carolina in terms of they were a team that got hot at the end of the season. They had won a bunch of games in a row, and they felt like they had stockpiled enough wins after the three losses that warranted them getting into the playoff. Now, I think some of the teams on the back end that got in, they were able to justify them being in, except for SMU, and that was what the whole discussion was around: was SMU, Alabama, South Carolina. And frankly, I thought SMU kind of deserved it last year with the way that they played coming out of nowhere, only losing in that ACC championship game, for example. So I just think they could find themselves in that South Carolina kind of boat. But since we're talking about fringe contenders, I do think it's important we kind of talk about some of those teams that we think could be fringe contending teams to squeak into the playoff or even just be on the outside looking in, because we had a conversation before we started about some of those teams and their schedules and frankly the chaos that could happen that could get those teams in.
Yeah, well, I mean, looking at just ahead of Nebraska, Cincinnati. That's a team Nebraska had beat week one on a neutral site. And honestly, that win looks a lot better than it did at the time because Cincinnati, the upset win over Iowa State, currently ranked ahead of Nebraska. But there's a lot of teams that are going to be interesting. Me and you were talking before the show. All these Big 12 teams are just such wild cards. Like Utah, BYU, all of these teams are going to be in contention at the end of the year. And, well, one, they're all ahead of Nebraska right now, but yeah, I think it's going to be tough. Obviously, Texas Tech probably the favorite right now to win the Big 12. So all of these teams, I think, would maybe have a better chance than Nebraska. I guess we're not 100% sure. I mean, Virginia could make a push at the ACC. Um, yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting with really no team being dominant. I'd say really outside of what Ohio State, Miami, and Indiana. I think those are like the clear cut top three. A&M's up there. I'm not really high on Ole Miss. So we could certainly see some chaos here at the end of the year. I'm not that high on Missouri. I just don't think they haven't really played anybody. They did play Bama pretty close. I will give them that, but haven't been on the road yet. Vanderbilt could be good, but do we really trust their defense? So there's so many question marks with pretty much every team that's ranked right now. Um, if I had to say though, I think USC has a better chance to make it than Nebraska does because USC certainly has well, I would say bigger wins than Nebraska does.
Yeah, and those two teams have to end up playing each other. So that
Yeah,
game can determine a lot in terms of the Big Ten and its standings. Obviously, those teams probably won't finish third because of Oregon, but at the same time, I think it's clear that three Big Ten teams get in for sure. The conversation would be if there's a way they could get 4 or 5 in, which would be Nebraska, USC, Michigan. If they can run the table and play Ohio State, and say they hypothetically were to beat Ohio State, Michigan would be in the ball game in terms of potentially squeaking to the playoff as well. I don't think they will, but in the event that were to happen, that would be the case for the Wolverines as well. I don't hate the USC idea. I just find it hard to believe that a Lincoln Riley led USC team is actually going to do for its brand and make a playoff push.
they've got a serious offense though. Maeva and Malachi Lemon. I don't know. Their offense is good, and the defense. I think this is one of the better defenses that Lincoln Riley's had in the past. Normally, Lincoln Riley teams, especially at Oklahoma, even as Caleb Williams teams, you just could not trust their defense whatsoever. But I think this might be a bit of a different story this year.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to harp on. They're a more complete team this year. They have two stud running backs. They've got a stud receiver room as well. They're one of the most skilled teams and talented teams in the whole country, at least offensively. Um, Whether they put that all together, we'll find out. They also have their annual game against Notre Dame at the end of the year, which could, in terms of this fringe contending team thing, bounce Notre Dame out. or bounce USC out. So Notre Dame's another team to just keep an eye on. I don't think they have enough big games left to potentially help them, but they're already ranked in that 15 to 17 range. So it's going to be helpful for them if they can just run the table. Few teams lose in front of them, but I like all of those Big 12 teams. So it's hard for me to pick one over another. Because you were high on Utah because of Devin Dampier. I was high on Texas Tech. Texas Tech is actually even surprising me with how well that they've played.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
They actually
all the
stomped
hype they
Utah.
had. So, um, all that hype Texas Tech has had for years and years and years, they're finally putting it on display. And it was, like I told you, a need to see it to believe it type of year for Texas Tech. And it actually has been. Utah, they're finally putting things together. They got smacked by Texas Tech in a game I liked the Red Raiders in, but that was another. I just need to wait and see. Devin Dampier has all this hype, but a lot of times in college football, that hype is unwarranted and it actually doesn't fulfill itself. So I like Utah. I like Cincinnati. Cincinnati's schedule also gives them, it puts them in a very advantageous position to potentially make that run and get into the Big 12 championship game. And the same can be said for another team that's unranked right now, led by Willie Fritz, very good head coach. Connor Weigman, former A&M quarterback, and that is the Houston Cougars. I know they're unranked. No one's really keeping their eye on Houston. I didn't even know if they'd win 5 games this year, but they're 5-1. They've got a very favorable Big 12 schedule for the way that conference typically goes. TCU and Baylor are their two toughest games. Those are two 4-2 teams that are unranked. So I think if Houston could run the table, they might be a player as well because simply they could get into the Big 12 championship game and potentially make some noise. So they're another team. We know the G5 teams. It's going to be some combination of USF, Memphis, or Tulane. We'll see what happens there, but I think it's going to be one of those teams. I know we had talked about Ohio. We said the MAC was crazy, and then Ohio turned around and lost to Ball State. So Ohio's kind of eliminated themselves from that conversation. Always keep an eye on James Madison as well, although they aren't undefeated at this point like they typically would be. So there's another Sun Belt team to potentially look for. And Navy. Navy is 6-0. They're not ranked right now, but if they could potentially beat Notre Dame, have a close game with Notre Dame, and win the rest of their games, I think they could make sense as well. So in terms of fringe contenders, we've got, Notre Dame's always going to be in that conversation. We've got Nebraska, we've got USC, we've got pretty much the whole top half of the Big 12 outside of the conference champion. And then a couple of teams I think that make sense as well. I know you brought up Missouri and Vandy, but if those two teams were to somehow run the table or win those important games that they have, they definitely are in that conversation. Missouri's at Auburn this week, so you'll get to see them on the road against a lesser opponent, but they've got ranked games with Oklahoma and a few other teams as well. As for Vanderbilt, they've got a big home game this week against LSU, who I have harped on me not being high on LSU, and this is a great opportunity for Vandy to potentially set the stage for themselves, making the playoff and kicking LSU out of that conversation as well. And in the ACC, I like how you brought up Virginia. There's a couple other teams though that are flying under the radar. I mean, Duke is having a very good season, and if they can run the table, they'll be in the Big Ten or ACC championship game. Excuse me. And then obviously we have to talk about Georgia Tech. They're ranked in that 10 to 12 range right now. They're flying under the radar. It's similar to the Texas Tech thing. I need to see it to believe it. Can they finally get over the hump of winning only 6 to 8 games? And Georgia Tech's done that so far. They've played phenomenally well. They're definitely with their schedule slated to be in the ACC championship game because that big game for them was Clemson. But we'll see. I think there's a chance we get 2 ACC teams in as well, which would say a lot about them because they're relatively known as the weaker of the 4 power conferences. I would even take the Big 12 over the ACC, but it's a very chaotic year this year, very wide open, especially if Ohio State, Indiana, and Miami were to go down.
Yeah, and taking a look at Georgia Tech's schedule as well, they're going to have a lot of chances to prove themselves. You mentioned Duke at Duke this upcoming weekend. Uh, Pitt. Pitt looks like a pretty good team. They've kind of turned things around. But then at the end of the year, looming, they host Georgia, and that could really be a game to kind of put them, up over the top, kind of put themselves on the map really as a true contender. But yeah, I mean they're currently slated to easily have a chance to sit in that Big 12 championship. I mean, if I had to pick, I think they're the most complete team in the Big 12. Or excuse me, in the ACC outside of Miami, just because Miami's been so dominant, and everybody's kind of thinking Miami's the favorite. But I think if I had to pick, I would probably take Georgia Tech, obviously, to compete with Miami for that ACC championship. And I think that assuming Georgia Tech wins out, even if they have that one loss aids to Georgia at the end of the year, I think they could still very well find themselves in the playoff just by being in the ACC championship.
And they're a team that has actually had Miami's number. So I would be very tempted to take Georgia Tech in that ACC championship game against Miami. It's really going to come down to how Miami's defense can do against that run heavy, ball control style offense that Georgia Tech likes to run with Haynes King. So I agree wholeheartedly. I think Georgia Tech could be a dangerous team to play in the playoff because they're really pesky. They stay in every game. They've got a good enough defense, and they limit enough possessions of the other team offensively to pretty much be in every game. So they're the type of team with the way that they play that you might not want to see because obviously a lot of these playoff games, once they're off of home sites, they're played in domes and other stuff. But prior to that, weather indicating Georgia Tech style of ball in terms of how they play, it's going to travel. And some teams can't say that. Tennessee can't necessarily say that. They're another fringe team. Georgia, I know you hyped on Georgia, but um, if Georgia were to somehow lose a couple of these wild SEC games, because it's what we expect out of the SEC is chaos and all these teams to beat each other up. If Georgia were to lose another game or two, they're not given to be in the playoff either. So they're going to have to take that Georgia Tech game very seriously once they get to that point in the season. A&M, I'm still TBD on A&M. I know they're ranked very high, but again, their schedule hasn't, outside of the Notre Dame game, they haven't really had a frightening game. And at the end of the year for them, they have a Texas team looming who could play spoiler as well. So if Texas were to somehow run the table, go undefeated the rest of the way, they beat A&M, they might be another fringe contending team, which is crazy to say with how their season started. But it's kind of just the definition of this season for college football is chaos, uncertainty, and frankly, a lot of new teams that can make a name for themselves. We see that in the NBA. We've seen that in the NFL a little bit as well, the MLB as well, in the playoffs. A lot of these new young gun type of teams with the NIL have kind of established themselves more than I think some of us anticipated them doing.
Well, yeah, and I think this was the goal of NIL and the transfer portal all along was to kind of spread out the talent pool and to kind of create parity, kind of the way that the NBA is implementing the second apron, to try to spread out the money, spread out the talent. And to be honest, I think it's absolutely achieving that goal right now. I mean, I know a lot of teams have their question marks, but outside of Ohio State and Miami, like we had said, I mean, there's really no team that's kind of overpowering the top right now. And really, all of these teams have utilized the transfer portal to their ability, have utilized NIL to their ability. So I think this is really I know the transfer portal is pretty crazy, and we could probably talk a ton about how to fix it and what's wrong with it and all of that. But yeah, I really think every team is kind of using it to their advantage, and I think this is good for college football that to see it kind of achieving what it was set out to do, and every team kind of using it for the better, at least for the most part. Because Ohio State, obviously Caleb Downs transfer, Julian Sayin transfer, Miami Carson Beck, Indiana Mendoza. So I mean, all these teams have utilized it. So you just kind of shows that kind of a message to Dabo Sweeney. You kind of have to adapt.
100% a message to Dabo Sweeney. It's ironic. I was playing in Ohio State Dynasty. I have Clemson on my screen because I'm going to be playing Clemson at some point here. But yeah, it is definitely a weird kind of unintentional shot at Dabo in terms of how well all of these teams are doing with the portal. And one of those teams, Indiana, has actually used the portal 2 years in a row to go get a quarterback. Curtis Rourke, previously of Ohio, very underrated. He actually performed quite well in the Big Ten last year. Now they go get Fernando Mendoza, who was at Cal. He has, in my opinion, probably exceeded expectations and been playing even better than Curtis Rourke was playing. And he potentially got his signature Heisman moment. Never thought I would have said that about Fernando Mendoza or an Indiana quarterback, but he got his potential signature Heisman moment this week when Indiana went to Oregon. They went across the country, beat Oregon by 2 scores, and it was a statement win for Kurt Signetti and his Hoosiers, and it really put them on the map as a national powerhouse and a team that Ohio State is going to have to be very wary of if both those teams happen to be in the Big Ten championship game when that time comes.
Yeah, this team is legit. It's honestly kind of amazing what Curt Cignetti has done in just 2 years. Utilizing the transfer portal, but yeah, I mean, I think they're a real threat to knock off Ohio State. And now the only thing is, like, if you get to the Big Ten championship and say Ohio State beats them by 2 scores, I really don't want that to discredit Indiana because personally, I know we're both Ohio State fans. I'm really high on Ohio State. I think this is one of the best defenses we've ever seen at the college level. I think Julian Satan's getting better each week. I mean, Ohio State is really the one complete team. I think Miami is the only other team you could really make an argument for that is truly complete. But Indiana's one of those teams that everybody's going to doubt until they knock off the top dog, which is Ohio State. But if they get to the Big Ten championship and Indiana keeps it within, say, 10 points, 1 score, yeah, I think a lot of teams are going to give them their respect. And I think last year was a weird year for them because, like, yeah, they had success and they even kind of competed with Ohio State in that game. It was outside of a garbage time touchdown by Will Howard. It was a pretty close game. And then Indiana kind of got, I don't want to say stomped by Notre Dame, but they got beat pretty handily by Notre Dame in the playoff. And I think that kind of discredited a lot of what they did for that year. So to see them having this sort of success this year is really good for Kirk Cignetti, a guy who I really like.
Yeah, I like him. The players obviously like him. People want to go play for him and his coaching philosophy. And he actually had a lot of praise for Dan Lanning and calling him one of the best young coaching phenoms that he's ever come across, and how he's been in the game a very long time. So for Oregon, I don't think it really hinders their playoff chances. Maybe in terms of being one of those higher seeds, 100%. But luckily for them, they have one of those Big Ten schedules that's a little bit more on the favorable side. So after this game, they don't have a ton that they have to look forward to. Obviously, they play Washington every year. I would like if they played UCLA, USC, and Washington every year, but that's not how it works. So we'll see. For Oregon, I don't really think it was that detrimental to them. I do think that I've still had it out on Dante Moore. I needed to see something to believe it. Obviously, that Penn State game happened, but Oregon was up. They're up 2 scores in the fourth. Penn State rallied and came back. Um, and if there is going to be a question mark for Oregon, it's either going to be the defense, which has been relatively good under Dan Lanning, or it's going to be their quarterback and his ability to get the ball out to his various weapons, which we saw Dylan Gabriel do quite successfully for a long time until the playoff when they had to play Ohio State and everything got shut down. So we'll see. They'll be in the playoff. I'm not really worried about Oregon. And I think if they were to get a rematch with Indiana at some point down the line, they may or may not have a thing or two to say about it. So I think overall it was one of the better games that we've had this year, and one of the more slept on ones in terms of the two teams and the fact that they're not the ones that are the most talked about. We've been talking about Ohio State and Miami in terms of just generally in the country all year. But hey, here's Oregon, here's Indiana. It's their statement game, and they showed out. So congratulations to Indiana on the big win. I never thought I would see a day Indiana's number three country, but it's here. It's they're not a basketball school anymore. Usually it would be number three Indiana in basketball, and they haven't been around in that for a while. So it's a fascinating development, and it's part of what you said. NIL has really transformed the game. And with that in mind, I want to talk about the AFC fringe NFL contending teams. We had a lovely conversation about this as well before we started, and I'll ask it like this: is the AFC wide open, or does the AFC still run through Arrowhead?
I think it was wide open for a little bit, but now I think the Chiefs are kind of finally finding their ground again. And I mean, look, they're 3-3. It wouldn't shock me if they end up winning their division. I know the Chargers are 3-0 in the division right now, but yeah, I mean, would you want to play the Chiefs right now in Arrowhead? The way that Patrick Mahomes is now playing, getting Rashee Rice back if he could be healthy, yeah. So I look, I don't really know how many people are counting the Chiefs out. I think a lot of people had their questions, including myself, about their defense because their defense hadn't looked good. And look, I'm not going to jump ship again just because they had one good performance against the Lions, although it is impressive, of course. But yeah, I think the AFC certainly does run through Arrowhead as it always does. But even anybody who gets to host Mahomes in the playoffs, I mean, there really is no sort of home field advantage against Mahomes. So I think that the AFC is still there's a lot of contenders, there's a lot of good teams. So I don't want to say it's wide open, but I don't think the Chiefs are a lock to win the AFC. They certainly should be the favorite, but I could definitely see some teams give them a run for the money. Like the Colts, I think are going to be certainly really interesting. I'm not that high on the Steelers. I don't know. Mike Tomlin led teams. They always look good in the regular season, and they haven't really beaten anybody either. I mean, Jets. They did play pretty well against the Patriots. So I don't know. I still need to kind of see it against some better teams for the Steelers. So honestly, it's kind of like it's kind of like college football, to be honest. Like I guess you could kind of count the Chiefs as Ohio State. And not that they're nearly as dominant. Obviously, their record is a little blemished, but a lot of teams in the AFC just kind of have their question marks. Like the Colts, they're a little banged up on defense right now. How much do you really trust Daniel Jones? Although Jonathan Taylor is playing like the best running back in football right now, and they've been great at home. So I don't know if um, the Chiefs are quite as dominant as they have been in the past, but there certainly is more question marks about some of these other teams.
Yeah, and there was actually a couple teams I didn't really get to mention. I kind of agreed with you, but I didn't really sit on it and think. Now that I've had time, um, I really like this Patriots team. Mike Vrabel knows what he's doing. He understands the Patriot way, as they like to say in New England and Foxborough. And Drake May's taken a second year leap. He has looked phenomenal. He's been taking care of the football. He's been using his legs in what has been a very, unfortunately, rather pass heavy offense because even though they try to run the ball, they can't run the ball. So we were expecting big things from Treyvon Henderson. It has not happened yet. Ramondre Stevenson continues to be one of the 8, 9 wonders of the world. We don't understand with Ramondre what's going on there. Um, but Stephon Diggs has helped the passing attack. Demario Douglas is an underrated receiver for them. Kayshon Boutte has had a very nice year as well in that receiving core. And then obviously they have two reliable tight ends in Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper, who was one of the top 10 tight ends for a few years, and now he's kind of fallen off after a few stints with a few teams. So they have a very underrated offense. They have a lot of savvy vets with the combination of some youth, and they've done a very good job. Obviously, they got a big win against the Bills. They were in the game with the Steelers. They weren't able to pull that one out. A few plays did not go their way, but I really like this Patriots team. Obviously, we could talk about Buffalo. Not currently as high on them as we had thought initially. Losing a couple of these games the way that they have, I think it says more about Bijan and the Falcons' offense than it does the Bills. To be honest with you, I don't even know if the Falcons will make the playoffs. But the advantage for the Colts, since you mentioned them, is they still have to play the Titans twice. They still have to play the Texans once. They've got games against the Jets and the Cardinals and the Raiders. So, frankly, I think it would make a lot of sense for the Colts, and also harping on that note, Jacksonville as well, being in the same division, they only have to play each other, frankly, twice. They both have very easy schedules moving forward, and although I'm not high on Jacksonville, they're going to win enough games to likely be in the playoffs. And you never know. Once you're in, crazy things happen. I would like to be high on the Chargers, but they've lost 2 games that they frankly should have won. You talked about the AFC looking wide open to start the year, and that was because the Chargers got off to a blazing hot start. It looked like they finally were going to top the Chiefs and win the division, but when you lose to the Giants and then when you lose to the Commanders after being up convincingly and then basically giving up 27 unanswered points and losing, there's more question marks there than we expected. And obviously, they had two brutal injuries to their run game with Omarion Hampton and Najee Harris out, but they have enough skill players. And also Joel and Rashawn Slater being out. So both tackles out as well. So despite those injuries, though, they have enough skill players around, in my opinion, to get the job done. So we'll see on the Chargers as well. There's a lot of kind of so iffy teams. I agree with your point on the Steelers. Um, the Ravens are probably out of it. I know in terms of betting, they're only minus 140 to miss the playoffs and they're plus 110 to get in. But the Ravens have to be nearly flawless to make the playoffs. There have only been three teams ever that started 1-5 and made the playoffs. That is 1.8% of 1-5 teams. The 1970 Bengals, who actually started 1-6, ran the table, went 8-6. They've finished first in the AFC Central. It was AFC Central at that time, long time ago, and then they finished fifth in the AFC. The 2015 Chiefs were the other team, led by Alex Smith, and shout out 1,000-yard receiver Jeremy Maclin at that time. Go Eagles! And then also the 2018 Colts. It was Andrew Luck's, I believe, final year he actually ended up playing. That year, or the year before that, the Colts started 1-5. They went on a crazy run, and they also made the playoffs. So there's only been three teams that do it. I don't think Baltimore does it. I don't even know. We don't even know when they're going to get healthy enough to try and do it. Um, as for the Steelers, they have a brutal, and I mean brutal, schedule the rest of the way. They don't really have any free games in there. So we're going to find out a lot about Pittsburgh. I think we're going to find out a decent bit about New England, who also has to play the Ravens and a few other teams down the stretch. But the AFC is like relatively open. I think if the Chiefs were able to lose a couple more bigger games, it would be open. But ultimately, if you're one of those teams, you're trying to get home field. You don't want it to be an Arrowhead. We've seen two of the NFL's best offenses, should be best teams in Detroit and Baltimore, go to Kansas City and frankly get destroyed. The only team that went to Arrowhead and won was the Eagles. So we'll see. And even then, that wasn't a pretty game. Frankly, the Eagles' defense won them that game. So I don't know. It probably still runs through Arrowhead, as much as I hate to say it, but they've earned that notion. They've earned that right. And frankly, until someone beats the top dog, they are the top dog. So I would say it goes through Kansas City as of now.
Yeah, I think it'd be kind of hard to argue that right now, but yeah, there's just so many interesting teams. You pointed out the Ravens. Yeah, I think they're done. I mean, just looking at where they're at right now, sitting at 1-5. I mean, I really have no reason to believe that they're going to win many of these games with Cooper Rush at quarterback, and so all right, they're not going to win the division, so they would need a wild card spot. Well, one of New England or Buffalo. I mean, they're already 3 games ahead of the Ravens. Chargers and Broncos are already 3 games ahead of them. The Colts
Also,
are 4 games ahead. Jaguars are 3 games ahead. So yeah, they've already got so much ground to make up. And I know we're only 6 weeks in, but I really have no reason to believe that they're going to turn things around really whatsoever.
yeah, and we didn't get a chance to talk about Denver. Um, Their offense, it's very similar to last year. Offense started slow, picked up at the end of the season. It has not picked up yet. It's grown in spurts, but uh, it, Denver arguably has by far the best defense in football. There's only a few teams that are even playing at the level of the Broncos defense. The Texans defense has kept them in these games and given them a chance to win a few, frankly. Otherwise, they would look as bad as Tennessee has. Um, and then also the Falcons defense has flown under the radar. They've been very good. Part of why they're above 500 team right now as well. So I do think Denver is the best defense in the league. Whether they're able to rely on it that heavily to get them into the postseason, I'm unsure. But they're another team to watch as well because defense travels like how run games travel. And I think if they get in the playoffs, they'll be a team that could be pesky as well. Um, but in terms of the ground the Ravens have to make up, it's probably going to be too much. Their only hope is that with this brutal Steelers schedule they have coming up, they lose enough games to give Baltimore a chance to win it like not 8-9 or 9-8. That's frankly the Ravens' ceiling at this point, and they're going to have to do that if they want to get in, and they're going to need help from the Steelers in order to achieve that.
Well, to be honest, I mean, I think they're going to get help tomorrow night because I do think the Bengals are going to beat the Steelers. I look, the Steelers. I know this might sound like a hating Browns fan, but Aaron Rodgers is playing really good football. I will give him that. I think it's funny the difference between Aaron Rodgers and Joe Flacco. They're both around. I think Aaron Rodgers is older by a year. They're around the same age, and Aaron Rodgers looks 10, 15 years younger than Joe Flacco does. I mean, Rodgers still looks mobile. The arm talent is still there. I mean, he's getting the ball to pretty much all of these receivers. I mean, even outside of DK Metcalf, I think Roman Wilson had a catch. I mean, Calvin Austin, when he was healthy, was getting some catches. They're making Darnell Washington look like a really good tight end. But yeah, you take a look at the Steelers' schedule. I mean, it gets tough. It gets tough. So, one, you got to go to Cincinnati, which I think is a tough game. Got to host the Packers. Got to host the Colts. Got to go to LA, take on the Chargers. I mean, none of these are very easy games, And then end of the year, they'll have to go to Detroit still. So it's going to be tough for the Steelers. I do think they're going to come back down to the norm, but yeah, I think they're going to surpass my expectations for them this year because when they signed Aaron Rodgers, uh, it was kind of a move where I was just like, eh, all right, cool. I think they're going to go 500 again. I didn't really think that was a move that was going to put them over the top, but Aaron Rodgers certainly looks a lot better than I had thought.
Yeah, he does. And to be frank, I'm going to put this out now. Uh, his season passing yards line in terms of the preseason was over 3199.5. So he needed to throw for just 3,200 yards to make over bettors happy. That is a pace of 188 yards per game through a 7 game season and 200 yards exactly if he were to miss one game and they play 16. So that's extremely low for a quarterback who has never had a season below 3,600 fully healthy. And uh, I just think that's, for context, Jalen Hurts threw for 2,900 yards last year, and he played almost the full season. He missed a few games, so it's semi similar. But Hurts was around like that 180 to 210 passing yards per game average. And in terms of what that means, it means you're not asking him to do much. They're not asking Aaron Rodgers to do much, but he is throwing the ball over 30, 35 times a game right now. And with how accurate he has always been and his ability to find the open receiver and that connection with DK that has continued to grow, he's gonna get to that number. I think as long as he stays healthy. And their run game has actually been a pleasant surprise. Jalen Warren, Kenny Gainwell, they've had some nice production across the board for their entire offense. And I do think once we segue into a potential next topic here, which we'll get into, they have an offensive coordinator in Arthur Smith who could once again become a head coach with the way that their offense has looked. So I think the Steelers could make sense. Obviously, they have one of the better secondaries in the league as well, with Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay and Joey Porter still, on the loom, getting ready to come back as well. And then obviously their pass rush. We know what their pass rush is about. So they're like weirdly a very complete team, but at the same time, it's not complete enough to be elite. It's complete enough to be 10-7, 9-8, potentially 11-6, get into the playoffs and try to make some noise. So it's a weird level of being a complete team, but they kind of are in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's what I think for the AFC. I'm pretty much in agreement with you. I actually think the NFC is probably more wide open, but it feels a lot more definitive who's going to be representing in the NFC Championship game or in the Super Bowl. Because I think we can all both agree we like Tampa Bay, we like the Rams, we like what we've seen from Detroit. Obviously, you can't count the Eagles out, but I'm counting them out in this conversation. Being, and then the Packers as well. I think those are the top dogs in the NFC right now, and frankly, all those teams are going to have to beat each other to eventually get to that top spot. But I really like all of those teams, and a team that's flying on the radar as well would be Seattle and how well Sam Darnold has actually looked outside of Minnesota, which I had question marks about that particular thing. So he's actually looked better than I thought after leaving Minnesota.
Yeah, the NFC West, I think, is going to be awfully tough. I mean, you're looking at the Niners, Seahawks, and Rams all sitting at 4-2, and I honestly I know the 49ers are banged up, but Kyle Shanahan is making it work. I don't know how sustainable it is, but he's certainly making it work. And the thing with Sam Darnold is a lot of people talked about, oh, he had such good weapons in Minnesota. Oh, Kevin O'Connell, quarterback whisperer, throwing to Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson. I don't know if it's much of a downgrade going to Jackson Smith and Jigba, who's looking like a top five wide receiver, and then Cooper Cup, who is just uber reliable. But yeah, no, it's really good to see Sam Darnold kind of taking his career back a little bit. I know he had like the one good year and kind of proving that it wasn't just a fluke year. He really is kind of that guy. And you mentioned the Buccaneers too. I think this is something that I mean we might not have enough time for this in this episode, but the reclamation project at quarterback I think is a new phenomenon this year that I think is probably going to be more of a thing here come the future. I think teams might be more inclined to go after quarterbacks who have experience but not necessarily the success at some of their first couple of stops because like you think Baker, I mean, Cleveland wasn't necessarily the most ideal situation, a little bit of turmoil, obviously 2019 bad head coaching hire, 2021 he was injured, so he needed another chance. And then you think about Sam Darnold. I mean, he went to the Jets. What quarterback has been successful with the Jets, right? So he kind of needed another second chance. Daniel Jones. So I mean, that's just three examples from this year. But yeah, I think that's certainly going to be kind of the thing of the future. I mean, I guess you could. I don't want to consider Jared Goff in this discussion because he did go to a Super Bowl. He was good in LA, but they traded him away and he had success at his second stop. So I think it'll be interesting for teams to see if they kind of opt with the rookie quarterback in the future or the reclamation project, but because it's kind of what we're seeing here in the NFC.
Yeah, and ironically for the Panthers, who got a big win, destroyed one of my locks of the week. Thank you, Dallas. I hate. I will now hate you guys even more. But I tried to put faith in you one time, and you got Rico daddled on. But um, the Panthers, they had Baker and Sam Darnold at the same time, and they actually were both sitting behind PJ Walker, who was in the UFL, very successful, MVP there, but not the level of quarterback neither one of these two guys run during that whole reclamation project for both of those guys. So it's very ironic. And the Rams, for example, they had Baker. I turned on a late night primetime game to a Baker comeback in a Rams uniform, and I thought,
Yeah.
man, it would be crazy if the Rams could just stash Baker until Matt Stafford retires. Now they're stashing Jimmy Garoppolo. It's different, and they're stashing Stetson Bennett, I guess, but similar concept. So that whole reclamation thing, I think, makes sense. I'm surprised more teams haven't done it. The Jets are trying to do it with Justin Fields right now, but they don't really have what they need at his disposal, in my opinion, for them to be successful. Like, in my opinion, if the Bears would have just kept Justin Fields and built their entire team the way that they have for Caleb Williams, they'd be exactly where they are right now. But they wanted to reset the rookie 4 years with the rookie contract, potentially five, and that is the window to try to win, and it makes sense. And trying to transition into that now, a team with a rookie quarterback recently fired their head coach. So the Titans fired Brian Callahan. 4-19 record in his 2 seasons with Tennessee. Definitely didn't go the way people had expected with Callahan, but the whole search is now going to be driven around their rookie number one overall pick, Cam Ward, and what a potential hire is looking for out of him or in him, and if that's their guy. The Titans, we had just talked about this before we started, 8 different combinations of either GM or head coach hirings and firings since 2022. And the only exception was an assistant GM being promoted to president. But if we're going to throw that in there, that is a total of essentially 8 to 9 either GM hirings and firings or head coach hirings and firings combined. So they've been a complete mess. They have continued to be a complete mess. They have no stability. And until they get some sort of stability, they're going to continue to be this way. But hopefully, this next head coach that they hire will be the answer, at least in the short, long term, for Cam Ward and that a Titans offense.
Yeah, the last thing you want to see is kind of what Baker had in Cleveland and what kind of Caleb Williams had a little bit. Multiple offensive coordinators, multiple head coaches. That's just not what you want. But honestly, it's kind of a weird firing in my opinion. Like, was it deserved? I mean, I guess, but like, this is kind of how I feel about the Browns too. Like, all right, say the Browns fire Stefanski, say they lose to the Dolphins on Sunday, and they fire Stefanski. Like, what what does that do? Like mid-season, like what does that really do? You know what I mean? Like you came at both these teams. You came into this year knowing that you probably weren't going to win very many games. That your roster wasn't very good. So for the Titans, I mean, it just seems like kind of odd. I can't see them even in the offseason bringing in a coach and having immediate success next year. Now maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to see Cam Ward have some success, but I mean, this roster has so many holes. I mean, you mentioned the defense. Yeah, the defense is okay, but I mean, who is Cam Ward really throwing to? You know, receiver wise, outside of Alec Manor, there's really not much of a run game. I know they have Tony Pollard, but just not a ton to get excited about this team. So for me, I'm not a big fan of firing coaches mid-season. I'm just not. I think it just every case is different. You know, some teams just kind of need that change of culture, that change of pace mid-season. But for me, I'd rather opt for the stability and keep the head coach and try to just keep riding it out, kind of like the Browns are doing. I'm happy that they haven't fired Stefanski yet. It's a whole completely different story, though. But yeah, I don't know if I'm really a fan of this firing.
Yeah, so I had to pull this up on my watch because I didn't want to potentially destroy the episode on my phone. But I had sent you something, I believe it was yesterday, about number one quarterbacks being taken overall and their head coaches. So Cam Ward, 2025, coach was fired. Caleb Williams, 2024, coach was fired. Bryce Young, 2023, coach was fired. And then also in 2016, Jared Goff, head coach, Jeff Fisher at the time, fired. Baker Mayfield, 2018, fired. Kyler Murray, 2019, Joe Burrow, 2020, and Trevor Lawrence, 2021, all number one overall picks at the quarterback position for a franchise, all of which their head coaches got fired in the same said season. So from 2016 to 2025, we're talking 10 years, and I think, what was that, eight of them, seven or eight of them, quarterbacks, all of them got fired. So it's been a trend, not just for the recent time, but it's been going on for a while now. And I think front offices need to find that head coach before the draft. That way, you're not firing him in the season, or give him time, build the team how you're supposed to build a team from the inside out, and then there you go. You don't have to fire everybody like the Titans continue to do because they're irrational thinkers and they like to overthink, and they think let's just fire somebody and it'll be fine. Like it actually does the complete opposite. And hopefully they can find somebody that can bring some stability to Tennessee. I know I had brought up Arthur Smith. He's already been with the Titans organization previously. He might make sense in terms of the style of offense he wants to run, trying to help ease Cam Ward in. If you're looking for more of the pass heavy type or someone who is going to go all in on that quarterback and have that type of attack, I think there's a couple different options. I'd have to look around, obviously, and think of potential OCs that could get hired. Joe Brady would be a good one for the Bills. I also think someone who isn't in a job right now that has typically been good with quarterbacks and offenses and teams in his first few years is Doug Peterson. I think he could make sense if he wants to continue coaching as a head coach. I think that option is there. This is going to be a wild one, despite their offense looking putrid. He has a mind for the game. Chip Kelly, with the Raiders, it is just a name to monitor in terms of the style of offense he may want to run, being very pass heavy or option heavy. Cam Ward has that type of similar skill set. He could be a name to monitor. There's going to be plenty of options, but we won't figure that out until later in the year when, of course, some coaches get fired or some OCs start interviewing for positions. So until that happens, we won't know, and the Titans will have to figure it out from there. But outside of that, we're actually going to damn near hit an hour on the spot. So I'm going to look forward to you if there's anything you have from a thoughts perspective or anything you would like to share, and then I will close this out.
I think the last head coach name that you didn't mention, I was waiting for you to mention, is Mike McCarthy. I think would be a very interesting head coach. And that's honestly, if the Browns get rid of Stefanski, that's somebody I would want them to go after. An established head coach, not a first time head coach. Hasn't worked out for them. Get an established leader of men. That's certainly a name that I think would be interesting because he was good in Green Bay. I mean, he was okay in Dallas. I think it's kind of impossible to work under Jerry Jones, to be honest. But yeah, I think that'd be a name to monitor as well.
It is impossible to work under Jerry Jones. And yes, I forgot about Mike McCarthy. I knew I was forgetting somebody. That was the name I was thinking of. Um, I will close it out with this. We will obviously post this uh, into tomorrow, so it'll be what is that, Thursday when you guys see this. We'll also then probably Friday uh, or Saturday morning early post our locks of the week. Frankly, they've gone rather swell for Joey. I think you're 6-4 now. I on the other,
I've tried to keep the volume down. That's kind of been the
yeah,
key.
he's we're doing opposite things. He's keeping the volume down. I'm ramping the volume up, but I'm
Yeah.
ramping the volume up to try to uh, get my record back to reasonable. So it was 3-7. It was looking rather promising to start last weekend, and then it went completely downhill from there. So 1-4 week, it's gonna put me at like 4-11 now. So I'm gonna make my blocks moving forward. The do not bet these. They make sense to bet.
The fades of the week.
The fades of the week. Yes, 100%. In fact, I might just start doing player props and say, hey, take Jackson Smith and Jigba yards every single
Hey,
week
well,
because
why not?
I'm going to. Um, I don't know. It's been that type of year for me, I guess, on locks, but we'll have that later in the week as well, so stay tuned for that. Other than that, another good episode. Lots of things to talk about, lots of things we didn't even get to talk about. The NHL season has started. The MLB playoffs are nearing an end. We'll have the World Series probably next week. And then the NBA season is nearing on Tuesday, as well as college basketball around the corner as well. So it's finally that time of year. Everybody's playing, everything is going on. It's one of the most exciting times to have the WNBA. The Aces just swept the NBA Finals or WNBA Finals again. Shout out to Asia Wilson, the women's goat. Her resume is quite long. Go look it up. It's pretty extensive. So outside of that, I'm Trayvon Hastings. With me is Joey Korsanowski. We're going to conclude another edition of Beyond the Box. Thank you guys for listening. Have a good one, and also have a safe weekend.